So good day, classmates and dear professor. So I am Irvin Joed V. Biason. I am tasked to report about topic 2.1, which is the impact of technology on the organization of distance education. So for today's presentation, I made use of the primary resource material uploaded in our LMS. However, I was also able to consult other reputable materials to add to the existing discussion. So for purposes of today's discussion, I would like to lay down some learning objectives. So after watching the video presentation, the students are expected to, number one, or letter A, describe how has the evolution of technology changed distance education. Two, explain the salient points in the different types of educational institutions, which we will be discussing in a little while. And letter C, gain insights in the local and foreign statistics related to DE. So in the material presented in our LMS, there were some statistics shown by the author. However, I took the liberty of updating some of the statistics, looking into more current details and numbers and figures relating to distance education. So to lay down the objectives or the agenda for today, as Stephen Covey would always say, we begin with the end in mind. So I will be discussing six specific topics for today's presentation. And that is number one, I will talk about the autonomous distance education. Two, we'll talk about for-profit distance education, followed by partnerships and consortia, and then workplace training and corporate universities. Fifth, virtual schools. And then the last is the recent statistics I was mentioning earlier. So this picture basically shows us a computer, and this is where we jump off from our discussion for today. And basically, the internet or the computer or the technology that we have now has paved way for challenging the status quo of the traditional face-to-face classroom instruction. With the advent of the computer, the laptop, tablets, and smartphones, we are now more connected. And in that way, students are also now more connected to schools, and they are not required to be physically present. To this, most educational institutions have actually capitalized on the use of these technologies, owing to the fact that more and more millennials and the more recent generations are actually accustomed into the use of these technologies. Therefore, as future educational leaders, it is our calling, or it is a challenge for us rather, to be able to harness these types of technology into providing better and more responsive education to our students or future students. And that is the main essence of distance education for today's context. So in the article presented in our LMS, the first classification of the distance education organization is what we call your autonomous distance education institutions. So I took the liberty of presenting the information in tabular format such that it will give you now a quick summary and a quick glance of what differs and what constitutes common points amongst these types of institutions. So under autonomous distance education institutions, we have three main classifications, and that is print and broadcast, online autonomous distance universities, and virtual institutes. So we will examine it into several variables such as looking into the characteristics, faculty and staff, campus, course delivery, strengths, and weaknesses. So print and broadcast organizations and universities basically are types of organizations which use multiple media teaching. Okay, so basically they use print, broadcast, and face-to-face classroom instruction, the more common ones that we know as of today. These types of organizations are manned by tenured research faculty, in the same way that most of the Philippine colleges and universities having face-to-face instruction would have a core pool of tenured faculty. These organizations have large administrative campuses. Some would even have a central campus with satellite campuses, or those within a network of bigger organizational groups. And they are able to use facilities in other colleges and or universities, depending on the partnerships between these organizations or educational institutions. In these types of organization, courses are delivered in email format, websites, print television, and audio. So it is a mix of printed, okay, virtual, and audiovisual presentation. One of the strengths of these types of educational institutions is that it is cost effective. So, from the lens of an educational administrator, this becomes a very good choice in setting up an organizational institution because it will not require a lot of capital outlay. According to the article that has been presented to us, print and broadcast organizations, universities actually require only half of the full cost as compared to other institutions. The only weakness seen in these types of organization is that students may have issues with respect to their access to technological hardwares and softwares. So when educational materials are broadcasted or published, let's say, and sent via email, we have to look into the ability of the students to access these with the use of the appropriate hardwares and technologies. The second type of institution is the online autonomous distance universities. So these are types of institutions that offers majority, if not all of their courses online. So in the same way as print and broadcast, they will have full-time academic staff. And in the same way, this time they will have contractual professors. So there is now an advent of contractual professors because having online autonomous distance universities with the capacity to teach online courses would require more manpower. As expected, there would also be more enrollees, hence the number of contractual professors that needed to be hired. These types of organizations have virtual campuses for student administration and teaching. So the students are able to log in into a virtual learning management system where they are able to process administrative related tasks and procedures such as enrollment, course registration, viewing of grades. Course delivery is primarily through the internet, and in some cases where institutions have partner regional study centers, students can actually visit these regional study centers and be able to use the hardwares and softwares in that study center to access their courses. The only weakness, or the strength rather, is that this affords flexibility, convenience, and location access. So there is a network of regional study centers which students can visit. Therefore, we are now able to assure students that they have a physical quote unquote study center which they can visit in case their computers at home or they would have issues surrounding internet connectivity at home. One of the weaknesses of online autonomous distance universities is, of course, the lack of face to face interaction. And for more traditional learners, this becomes a very big issue because they would crave for the traditional presence of their teachers and classmates. They would always, of course, also have to an extent some limitation as to access of resources. Again, that goes for hardwares and softwares. The third classification are virtual institutes. These are online components of a traditional distance education or campus-based education. So you have a physical school, a traditional school or university, which has now put up a virtual institute complementary to the existing physical plant as we say it. So they are also manned by core full-time faculty members. And in virtual institutes, the courses are delivered in a virtual campus using an LMS or a learning management system. In the same way, course delivery is via the television, the internet, private sector computer institutes. So in the same way as regional study centers, virtual institutes may have partnerships with the private sector in putting up these computer institutes or places where students can visit and use some computers for learning. One of the strengths cited among virtual institutes is that it is able to provide diversity in approaches to teaching, granting that courses are delivered using different modalities. Now, the second classification are dual mode institutions. And if you can focus on the left side of your screen, dual mode institutions are conventional teaching institutions with on-campus and distance education. And on the right side of the screen, I have shown you some of the more prominent institutions that have actually gone to dual mode. So you have the Pennsylvania State University, the Deakin University, and in my case, as a graduate of the Philippine Women's University, so they also have a dual mode institution. So they have a physical school for the School of Education, and they also have a virtual campus for the School of Education being offered for Filipinos in remote places. In dual mode institutions, faculties and staff are also combined in the same way as previous organizations or types that we have discussed. So you have full-time and contractual faculty, and that will, of course, greatly depend on the number of student enrollments. Campuses are combination of physical and virtual campuses, and courses are primarily delivered in two kinds. So you have print-based and the remote classroom. So students have the option to enter rather into the LMS and be able to interact with their classmates and their course facilitator using the internet, or they may resort to some media. Try media that has been prepared beforehand by the faculty in charge. One of the strengths of dual mode institutions is that it affords these types of organizations a lot of low cost advantages because once the materials have been published or prepared, let's say in audiovisual presentations, these are preserved, okay, ideally in cloud, so it does not require a lot of physical space. And this gets to be reused for a couple of years before these are going to be reviewed and revised according to industry standards. Initially, one of the weaknesses is increased cost in terms of production of educational materials. However, eventually cost decreases because, again, as mentioned, these are deposited in virtual formats. Now, another weakness of dual mode institutions is that there is a lack of well-qualified contractual instructors. So by demand, you will have a lot of enrollees for the virtual classroom or the virtual classes offered by these dual mode institutions. And when you hire part-time faculty, not all of them may have the necessary competency and skills to engage and to manage virtual classes. Now, it also takes a lot of time to move traditional educational materials in print, in books, in textbooks, or let's say manuals into virtual formats. So there is a time factor as a weakness, or it would also require faculties in charge to be able to have considerable time so that we are able to convert these materials with quality into virtual formats. So as a point of reflection, before we move on to the next type, I have here a question posted on the right side of the screen. Can you think of a Philippine school which uses a dual mode of instruction? And would you say that these institutions have the same strengths and weaknesses as cited on the left side of the screen? So probably you can answer that in the comment section once I upload this presentation. Moving along, our next classification is what we call your for-profit rather, distance education institutions. And there are two main classifications. You have your private e-learning universities and your not-for-profit university spin-offs. So let's focus first on the first, which is on the blue side, the private e-learning universities. These are basically organizations which can be spin-off for-profit educational companies. So privately owned e-learning universities, one of their main thrusts or KPI is to generate profit for these educational companies. So they are also manned by full-time academic staff. And in the same way, they have contractual faculty, again, dependent on the number of enrollees for that particular institutions. Commonly, these contractual faculties, according to our main resource materials, are working professionals. Their campus is virtually founded. So it's a virtual campus where students can access student support, administration, course registration, procedures, etc., as well as the teaching learning activities are delivered virtually. Courses are delivered internet based with adjunct support resources, or in certain cases, there are face to face classes through their local centers in cases where these privately e learning universities have partner local centers. So it can be a mix of face to face together with virtual learning environment or purely a VLE type of campus. One of the strengths among private e-learning universities is that, well, for a business, from the business side, it is profit generating. And because we deliver courses online through the internet, there is a massive reach. So geographical boundaries are not going to be an issue for e-learning universities. And since these are companies which rather one of their KPIs is to generate income, and therefore they would charge normally higher than other universities or educational institutions. One of the strengths is that their learners also have the means to pay. So, money and funding may not necessarily be an issue for these kinds of universities. One of the weaknesses is that it plays a very specific niche, so that you target a very small segment of the educational market from a business sense. And when you offer now these courses, which are mainly profit driven, um, quality may or may not be assured, but commonly programs delivered through these e-learning universities may not necessarily be accredited by accredited professional organizations or the industry. Now, on the right side, we now discuss the not-for-profit university spin-off. So, not-for-profit university spin-offs are, from the word itself, spin-off companies, which means it originated from a mother company, and these operates on a commercial basis. In the same way that e-learning universities are for-profit educational companies, not-for-profit university spin-offs also operate commercially. Although it is termed not-for-profit university spin-off, its goal still is to contribute economic development, at least for the region where it belongs, and to the main educational institution where it is partnered. So in one way, not-for-profit university spin-offs also deliver the money or the profit which the mother university needs. So it's still a revenue generating, but not necessarily focused on for-profit e-learning universities. So they are your institutions who would term themselves as your not-for-profit institutions. Well, in certain cases, they may be tax exempt, right? Because they are not-for-profit universities. So they are termed USOs and ASOs, which are colloquially read as university spin-offs or academic spin-offs. So their faculty and staff, their campus and course delivery will follow the mother university setup. So if the mother university would have a pool of tenured research faculty, then they may also be the ones manning the not-for-profit university spin-offs. Right? In the same way that the campus follows the mother university, and course patterns and course delivery follows the same. One of the strengths of not-for-profit university spin-offs is that it acts as a valuable knowledge spillover for other companies. So in cases where you have a big network of university which are able to generate a lot of researches and publications and who have a little bit excess of funding, they are now setting up not-for-profit university so that whatever knowledge is generated through the researches of these mother universities acts as, let's say, further research agenda of this not-for-profit university spin-off. In the same way, since your faculty and staff follows the mother university, so you have tenured faculty and staff manning these not-for-profit university spin-offs. So their knowledge delivered in the traditional classroom is the teachings are also shared in these not-for-profit universities. So we are able to share these valuable resources. One of the weaknesses is that it is costly, especially when it is when you are still setting up this not-for-profit university spin-off. Maintaining these kinds of spin-off universities also require a lot of resources. That includes manpower, that also includes funding, and that also includes maintaining licenses and agreement. And these are typically the ones cited reasons for closure of these not-for-profit universities. When these not-for-profit universities close, the common term we see in the business world is that we roll back these non-for-profit universities. So they are again reabsorbed by the mother university. Now, moving along, our the next part is partnerships and consortia. So for partnerships and consortia, there are four main types. So you have your public-private partnership, state or national consortia, international, and your for-profit consortia. So we will examine these four in three specific variables. We look into the characteristics, the services, and its advantages. Public-private partnerships are colleges and universities that have a partnership or an agreement with a private organization. Well, in the Philippines, we call that the PPP. They are able to provide a lot of different services, and it enables an institution to maintain online programs, in-service teacher training courses, and they also give distribution rights to courses. So let's say a private institution develops these courses and they are now able to pass it along to the public sector. So the distribution right is granted to the public sector, but the copyright may necessarily be owned by these private institutions. So in-service programs are not limited to teacher training courses. We also see that, let's say in my case, because I am a nurse, we have a lot of private public partnerships in the nursing academia. So you have private hospitals, groups of hospitals partnering with the academe or those colleges and universities that feed them the students. And the materials are co-developed by industry practitioners. And these are enjoyed by the students at their baccalaureate years. And that's very helpful because, especially at the school level, they are able to appreciate now industry standards and what the real world looks like. One of the advantages of PPPs is that it is able to afford timely development of e-learning among institutions without prior experience because these private organizations have more experience in developing e-learning materials. Public institutions take advantage of this and they are able to set up a distance education and virtual schools with the knowledge and the materials that have already been developed by these private organizations. State or national consortia rather, basically share online, they have a sharing of online courses from different institutions. So there is a group of different universities brought along by a common denominator, and they share resources to deliver these online courses. So apologies for the lack of spaces here, but state or national consortia are able to provide contracting services. Credentials are able to be transferred to individuals. And in the same way, accreditation is transferred to different individuals through code sharing, essentially, from these partner educational institutions. And they're able to provide a wide array of convenient, cost-effective education. So let's say they are developed, there's a group of educational institutions that are developing a particular course. And let's say university letter A has a specific strength in, let's say, material development. So they will take care of that part. University B will have the faculty. So they will take care of the faculty. University C will be, let's say, in charge of production of these technological materials. So we have now a harnessing, no? We are able to harness the strengths of these organizational educational organizations. One of the advantages of state or national consortia is that it allows students to take approved courses from variety of providers. So your diploma will essentially have multiple logos of these partner institutions. And later I will show you in a little while. International consortia basically now is a partnership among educational institutions without national boundaries. So you'll have partnerships from, let's say, a Hong Kong university and a Philippine university. Or let's have a very classic example. Mapua has a partnership with Arizona State University. So that's an example of an international consortia. So their services, they provide full service educational offerings so that in the case where I mentioned, let's say about Mapua, they're able to provide BS Nursing, Doctor of Medicine, some management courses, engineering courses in partnership with the University of Arizona. And there are faculty sharing, material sharing. So even if students are located in the Philippines, their diploma will also bear the logo of Arizona University. So an advantage of these types of partnership is that there is sharing of teaching facilities beyond national borders. And of course, it goes without saying that sharing is also primarily done virtually. And this leads to internationalization of education. So the diploma, the credentials that you bear may have higher impact or greater weight, okay, being now seen by the industry experts because you have international accreditation granted by these consortia. For-profit consortia basically is a commercialization of the education. So you have commercial partners playing a leading role, wherein the main objective is to generate income for the educational institution. In the same way, they are able to offer full service educational offerings. And advantage of this is that there is borderless education and sharing of school resources. Very much uh, likened to the international consortia. So this is an example on the left side of the screen, an international consortia in the European Union. So this is part of the European Politics and Society Joint Diploma or the EPS Joint Diploma. So the school is there are five schools, and the main school delivering the course is found in Czech Republic. And as you see at the bottom portion, it reads the different logos, and it is even bearing the seal of the European Union. So of course that adds to the credibility, and that shows a great extent of internationalization when this has been granted to a particular student. In this case, Karel graduated with the degree of MA or Master of Arts. So, as a second point of reflection, what do you think are the disadvantages now as educational leaders if your schools participate in these types of consortia, but your school has very minimal impact in the course delivery and the accreditation of graduates? So, let's say you participate in this consortia, and one of the only contributions of your school is basically to develop the materials to produce these educational materials, these videos, these handouts, and you have no control who enrolls. But since you are part of the consortia, your logo is there, and people think you have a direct contribution to graduates of these educational consortia or international consortia. But in fact, you only develop, right, the materials, and you don't have a say as to how you students are going to be graded, who checks these materials, who qualifies them to bear these competencies. What do you think are the disadvantages in that case? Now, the last part is to talk about two very specific broad categories again, and these are workplace training, corporate universities, and virtual schools. So, workplace trainings and corporate universities are divided into three. You have private e-learning companies, corporate universities, and professional associations. Private e-learning companies are private companies that provide wide array of educational solutions with the objective to sell. For example, LinkedIn Learning or Coursera. They provide content. Okay, again, apologies for the typographical here. They also provide technology platforms. So a school, let's say Mapua again, subscribes to LinkedIn Learning. So their students at the college level are able to supplement learning in the classroom through enrolling in LinkedIn Learning. So they access LinkedIn Learning, and they're able to watch videos, they get handouts, case brief, case vignettes, etc. These companies also provide e-learning solutions. So companies would buy CPK licenses, and they would spearhead, let's say, training needs analysis, curriculum design. So these private e-learning companies are also manned by very seasoned professionals. So it's a plug and play type of education, and it's very practical and time saving on the part of the educational institution who buys it, because you basically subscribe, you pay them, you get to use their resources for a for a specified duration of time. Corporate universities, on the other hand, develops and manages their own e-learning programs. So, for example, you will have institutions who have the capacity to develop their own quote unquote LinkedIn learning, which is what we call in the Philippines, let's say, an in-house e-learning program. So corporate universities can also extend beyond the academia. So let's say you have companies, especially multinational companies with a lot of resources developing their own in-house training programs. So these are considered postgraduate courses. So examples of these is Ford Star for the Ford company, the Volkswagen Auto University, and in my case, when I worked with St. Luke's Medical Center, we have what we call your St. Luke's Healthcare Academy. So I was part of the St. Luke's Healthcare Academy as a clinical nurse educator, and we developed competency matrices of what nurses need to know and learn as their tenure gets longer in the health center. So an advantage of this is that it fosters a culture of continuous learning on the part of the professional. And the last is your professional association. So these professional associations deliver professional development programs for its members. So like again, in my case, you have the Philippine Nurses Association, which regularly conducts CPD applied programs for compliance again with the CPD law, and of course to upskill the nurses. So these professional associations deliver specialized education. So another example on the part of the lawyers in the Philippines, you have the MCLE, or the Mandatory Continuing Legal Education, which is governed or mandated rather by the Supreme Court of the Republic of the Philippines. So an advantage, of course, is that these courses, since these are done in partnership or delivered rather by the professional associations, or the APOs as we call it in the Philippines, the credibility is of course established, right? And the last are virtual schools. And virtual schools are essentially schools that provide alternative modes of study other than face-to-face classes, especially in secondary schools. So these are schools that are able to provide learning solutions across different geographical boundaries. So they're able to provide specialist subjects from teachers outside the community. So let's say you can have a virtual school with a very particular subject, let's say zoology, and then one of your instructors can be a zoologist from Australia, and then another one from Texas. It's very specialized course delivery and subject. So an advantage is that when rural schools have partnership with these kinds of virtual schools, they have now access to wider array of educational resources that are typically enjoyed by those in urban and more progressive educational institutions. So, the next part of our discussion, and I hope everything is clear so far, is for me to provide you some more updated statistics. In the material that has been uploaded, there were some estimations as to how many enrollees of these kinds of distance education institutions. However, those have been made approximately years ago. Now, to present you with some more updated statistics, so I have here statistics from the National Center for Education Statistics from the United States. And in the undergraduate level in the United States, 6 of every 10 undergraduate students, or 61%, actually are enrolled in at least one distance education. And when we look at the totality of the same population, 28%, or 3 out of 10 students are actually exclusively taking distance education. So if you would interpret this, at least 9 in every 10 undergraduate students in the United States are exposed to distance education already. In the post-baccalaureate level, 56% of post-baccalaureate students are enrolled in at least one distance education course, and 40% or 4 out of 10 students are exclusively taking distance education. And if we look at that, we would be able to see that 96% rounded off 10 in every 10 post-baccalaureate student is at least exposed to distance education in the United States. Now, in the Philippines, based on the Department of Education briefer in 2022, they were able to disclose that approximately 7.6% or 2.1 million of K to 12 learners are under online distance learning, or what we call your ODL model. Out of these 2.1 million K to 12 learners in the Philippines, 41 of them are actually in the private sector. So this confirms, of course, one of the notions in the Philippines that the private sector has more access to better technology. And students in the private sector actually enjoy better access to some technologies, educational technologies. Now, specifically, when we look at some certain demographic variables, the online distance learners in the K to 12 in the Philippines, 5% of them are elementary learners, 9% are junior high school, and 15% are senior high school learners. So, as the student matures and as their grade level increases, more of them gets to be exposed in the online distance learning. So, well, this is part in assumption that because as they age, they are now able to navigate distance learning and they're now able to use the hardwares and softwares. So, naturally, we would expect more of students accessing ODL as their year levels actually increase. Now, in the collegiate level, according to the data by Kitongan and Gutierrez, in the Philippines, there is an approximated 2,400 colleges and universities which has adopted forms of online learning since the pandemic. If we look at the CHED data, the CHED actually says that there is around 2,300 to 2,400 Philippine colleges and universities. Now, if we are going to correlate that with Kitongan and Gutierrez, then we would assume that since the pandemic, 100% of Philippine colleges and universities, to an extent, has already adapted an online learning modality. That is, of course, part and parcel, basically grounded on the CHED promulgation in 2022, where CHED has directed higher educational institutions to adapt flexible online learning, again, due to the pandemic. So a lot of the organizations, 100% of these colleges and universities have complied with CHED. Otherwise, their accreditation may have been put in jeopardy. So in conclusion, we have already discussed the different types of these organizational distance education uh, and their effect on how courses are delivered. And we're able to appreciate how one differs from the other. But essentially, when you look and examine all of these, a lot of these organizations basically deliver teaching and learning experiences in a virtual manner, right? We don't have the physical teacher to student interaction. And you are in front of the laptop, you are using other resources provided by the faculty in charge. And of course, the development of these types of educational or distance educational organizations are part and parcel because of the available technology and, of course, the demand from the educational market. So to wrap up my discussion, these are all the references that I have used. Again, primarily it is from the work of Bates, The Impact of Technology on the Organization of Distance Education, which has been uploaded in our virtual classroom. So I hope you learned something for today. For any questions, feel free to reach out to me using our classroom. And thank you very much for your kind attention. Take care and God bless.